Story number 1. The scent of stale cigarette smoke and burnt popcorn was a constant presence at Mr. Henderson's doorstep, a subtle testament to the life he led within the confines of his apartment. Known for his rare appearances, usually under the cover of night, whispers of his past life fluttered among the neighbors. Was he a retired veteran, an ex-convict, or perhaps a government conspiracy theorist? Despite the rumors, I made attempts to reach out, leaving notes of concern about his overflowing mailbox or offers to assist with groceries, only to be met with silence. One chilling evening, the fragile peace of our building was shattered by a scream that seemed to tear through the very fabric of our quiet existence. It emanated from Mr. Henderson's apartment, a sound so raw and desperate that it ignited a primal fear within me. After a moment of hesitation, driven by a mix of concern and fear, I found myself pounding on his door, calling out his name, only to be answered by continued screams. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, I forced the door open, revealing a scene of utter disarray. Mr. Henderson was on the floor, his eyes wild with fear, speaking of imaginary assailants. The room bore the marks of his turmoil, yet no sign of an actual intrusion could be found. In the days that followed, an air of tension settled over us. Mr. Henderson grew more reclusive, his behavior more erratic. Strange symbols and incoherent warnings appeared on my door, sparking rumors and concern among the neighbors. Even the police, summoned to investigate, found no evidence of foul play, attributing Mr. Henderson's claims to delusions. Yet, an unsettling feeling lingered, an undercurrent of fear that refused to be dismissed, eroding the sense of safety I once took for granted. Then, one night, as muffled sounds seeped through the thin walls, curiosity overcame my apprehension. Peering through my door, I witnessed a sight that chilled me to the bone. Mr. Henderson, lost in a world of his own, surrounded by empty pill bottles, a stark revelation of his battle with unseen forces. The realization that his paranoia was not the result of external threats, but a manifestation of a deeper, internal struggle, struck a chord of empathy within me. Compelled by a newfound understanding, I took action the following morning, reaching out to emergency services to report a psychiatric emergency. The paramedics arrived swiftly, and as they escorted Mr. Henderson to the hospital for the help he desperately needed, I couldn't help but reflect on the events that had unfolded. What had begun as a tale of mystery and suspicion ended with a community coming together to support one of their own in a moment of vulnerability. Mr. Henderson's journey from isolation to receiving care served as a poignant reminder of the importance of compassion and the often invisible struggles that define our humanity. Story number 2. Moving into the new neighborhood, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. It was a fresh start in a seemingly peaceful suburb, far from the noise of city life. The houses were spaced comfortably apart, each with its own manicured lawn and welcoming porch. My nearest neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Crane, lived in the house directly to my left. At first, he looked like an old-fashioned person from the past, with his well-kept garden and quiet demeanor. But soon, his peaceful appearance broke down, showing something troubling hidden underneath. It began with small, odd incidents. Mr. Crane would stand at the edge of his property, watching me intently as I worked in the yard or left for work. His stares were piercing, filled with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off as the curiosity of a lonely old man, but his behavior soon escalated. Items from my yard began to disappear or were found broken. I couldn't prove it was him, but the suspicion bothered me a lot. One evening, as I returned home, I found Mr. Crane in my backyard. He was tampering with my garden hose, a twisted smile on his face as water flooded the flower beds that I had spent weeks nurturing. The sight of him there, uninvited and destructive, ignited a fury within me. I confronted him, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. His response was a chilling chuckle, followed by a cryptic warning. "You don't belong here." The situation reached its boiling point. One night, when I was awakened by the sound of breaking glass, grabbing a baseball bat for protection, I rushed downstairs to find Mr. Crane inside my house, a window shattered by his entry. His eyes gleamed with malice as he advanced towards me, a large kitchen knife in his hand. The air was thick with tension as we stood there. The elderly man I had once dismissed as harmless was now a clear and present danger. The physical altercation was swift, but terrifying. I managed to disarm him, but not before receiving a shallow cut along my arm. The police arrived soon after, and Mr. Crane was taken into custody. As I watched him being led away, his eyes met mine, filled with a hatred that sent shivers down my spine. It was a stark reminder of how quickly normality can be upended, how the person you least suspect can harbor darkness within. The incident left me with a deep sense of unease, a constant vigilance that lingered long after Mr. Crane was gone. The neighborhood never felt the same again, its quiet facade now a reminder of the night when fear came knocking at my door.
Story number 3.
The atmosphere around Mr. Thorne's apartment had always been charged with a peculiar tension, a tangible unease that seemed to thicken with each passing night. The soft glow emanating from his windows hinted at secrets, and the whispers among neighbors spoke of odd packages and even stranger visitors, shadows that flitted away as quickly as they appeared. My intrigue grew with every unexplained noise and late-night shuffle, transforming into a gnawing suspicion that refused to be ignored. One afternoon, a distinct and acrid smell seeped from under Mr. Thorne's door, replacing the usual, unremarkable scents of daily life. It was sharp, chemical, and unmistakable to those who knew it, the odor of methamphetamine production. The pieces began to fall into place, painting a picture of a man deeply entangled in the world of drug manufacturing and distribution. Online searches and hushed conversations with neighbors confirmed my fears. The symbols on his packages were known identifiers of a dangerous drug cartel. The realization hit me hard. Each suspicious detail from the past weeks slotting into a terrifying narrative. Mr. Thorne was not the quiet, reclusive character I had thought him to be. Rather, he was a key player in a network that spread poison through the veins of the city. My conscience wrestled with uncertainty. Should I act on my suspicions and alert the authorities? Or was I risking too much on conjecture alone? Then, one tense evening, the odd hum of activity from his apartment reached a fever pitch. Shouts, muffled by thick walls, were abruptly cut off, replaced by an ominous silence. Compelled by a mix of fear and moral obligation, I found myself standing before his door, heart racing. As I raised my hand to knock, the door swung open to reveal Mr. Thorne, his face ghostly pale, a sheen of sweat visible under the dim hallway light. "Stay back," he pleaded, his voice a strained whisper as he brandished a makeshift weapon, a desperate bid for time. The air was thick with the scent of chemicals, a tangible sign of his guilt. Before I could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and law enforcement burst through the door, their arrival marking the end of Mr. Thorne's dark descent. In the aftermath, as the reality of his involvement with the drug cartel became undeniable, the neighborhood was left to grapple with the heavy silence that followed. Mr. Thorne's story served as a harrowing reminder of the dangers lurking behind closed doors, hidden in the shadows of ordinary lives.
Story number 4.
Mr. Johnson, my next-door neighbor, was a figure wrapped in an air of intimidation. His towering presence intense gaze, and habit of slamming doors fed the building's gossip mill, casting him as a troubled ex-military figure burdened by his past. His refusal to engage in conversation, opting instead for menacing glares, communicated more about his disposition than any words could. The initial signs of aggression were hardly noticeable, but deeply unsettling. A deliberate scratch marred the side of my car, a silent yet clear warning. Although I initially dismissed it as baseless fear, the situation quickly escalated. Mr. Johnson's behavior grew increasingly aggressive, from under-his-breath insults to full-blown alcohol-fueled outbursts that penetrated the thin walls of our building. His threats, though veiled, became a constant source of anxiety, disturbing my sleep and peace. Attempts to address the situation through the building's management yielded no real action. They simply dismissed him as a harmless eccentric. But living in constant apprehension was taking its toll on me. Every sound from his apartment became a source of stress, every encounter a nerve-wracking ordeal. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, I began to meticulously record every incident. The scratch on my car, the dates and times of his tirades, and even his intimidating stares. This compiled evidence became my shield when I approached the police. Despite initial reluctance and procedural delays, the detailed account of my experiences eventually led to action. The climax of this ordeal came one fateful night, not because of anything I did. It seemed Mr. Johnson thought my trying to talk to him about the noise previously was a sign of me challenging him. He made things worse. I heard a loud bang against a wall in his apartment, a sound that I had learned to dread. This time, right after, he came yelling outside my door. He accused me of complaining to the landlord as he banged on my door, intent on confrontation. I realized that he had interpreted my silence on the latest disturbance as a final straw, pushing him to direct confrontation. No longer the intimidated neighbor he expected, I was armed with pepper spray and a firm resolve. When I confronted him, declaring my readiness to defend myself, it revealed a glimpse of vulnerability in him, a brief window into the turmoil within. As police sirens filled the air, he withdrew, and the authorities quickly took control of the situation, arresting him for his actions. The aftermath of this confrontation wasn't a simple resolution. The fear and tension had left deep marks on me, a persistent unease that didn't disappear with Mr. Johnson's arrest. Yet in the silence that followed, I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known. By facing the source of my fear head-on and standing up for myself, I had not only countered a tangible threat, but had also overcome the paralyzing grip of fear itself. This ordeal taught me the power of resilience and the importance of confronting one's fears, lessons I would carry forward.
Story number 5.
Residing in the tranquil suburb was precisely as I envisioned upon my arrival. The avenues were adorned with majestic oaks, their foliage softly confiding secrets to those who would listen. The local community welcomed one another with genuine smiles, fostering a sense of immediate belonging. However, this sense of harmony was disrupted by my next-door neighbor, Mr. Kirby. His dwelling, marked by fading paint and a neglected garden, starkly contrasted with the surrounding neatness. His manner towards me was distant, often limited to brief acknowledgments or strained smiles, and his unsettling habit of observing me through his windows added to my discomfort. My unease intensified with each odd incident around my home, such as misplaced gardening tools and an inexplicably open back gate. Events too minor to cause alarm individually, but collectively suggested a pattern of subtle hostility. The idea of confronting Mr. Kirby crossed my mind, seeking a resolution, yet his overt animosity deterred any dialogue. The tension reached its peak one late autumn evening. Returning home to a silent neighborhood, I was startled by the noise of stealthy movements just as I was unlocking my door. Turning around, I found Mr. Kirby emerging from the darkness, desperation evident in his posture as he brandished a crowbar. The standoff on my porch, where my safe haven was threatened, was charged with an intense energy. Driven by survival instincts, I repelled his advance, surprising us both with my forceful resistance. Mr. Kirby withdrew, leaving behind a veiled threat of unfinished business. Trembling, I reported the incident to the police, who responded promptly, providing a momentary sense of security. In the aftermath, Mr. Kirby's arrest unveiled his dire financial straits, which had led him to view my property as a potential solution to his problems. This revelation unsettled the community I had grown fond of, disrupting our cherished peace. The ordeal made me acutely aware of the fragile nature of trust and safety within our lives. Mr. Kirby's actions, driven by despair, highlighted how little we know about those living right beside us. As I endeavored to restore my sense of security, my empathy for Mr. Kirby was undeniable. His actions, though unforgivable, stemmed from a place of profound desperation, costing him his freedom and place within our community. The neighborhood will recover with time, but the memory of that night remains a poignant reminder of the hidden frailties beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect suburban existence.